warm welcome to you as we open our new session from the 56th edition of Art Matters. Raza Foundation and India International Center collaborate in this effort, and it has gone on for 56 months. So it's nearly 5 years that we complete. I'm particularly delighted because many people complain that we have too many things. We're doing too many things, of course, that's true. But we're doing too many things in too many different genres. In theatre we do very little, we want to do a little more now. But we have been doing things in poetry, we have been doing things in visual arts and music and dance, etc. and ideas. So a very warm welcome to you. We have requested 3 eminent women theatre persons this evening to talk to you about her theatre, their theatre. As is well known to most of you that it is not, you have very eminent people. Let me introduce you. You have Maya Rao, who has been both an actor, dancer, a teacher, and also an activist. With most theatre, perhaps in some form or the other, is a form of action anyway, but she is particularly vocal and active on social and political issues. We have KIRTI JAIN, who has been teaching and directing. And we have NEELAM MANSINGH, who has come from Chandigarh, who has also taught and who has also been directing, who is one of the major theatre directors in the country. Now, as it's obvious to most of you that women theatre persons have become quite dominant, well deservedly so, and some of the most important theatre work in the country, in many languages, is being done by women directors. In Malayalam, in Kannada, in Hindi, in Bengali, in Marathi, etc. Now, the questions that arise, or perhaps may arise, whether her theatre has faced any gender prejudices. Because gender prejudices are very strongly entrenched in our society, in our body politique. And where there have been any abnormal problems, unusual problems that only theatre, women theatre directors or actors face. And has it in some particular ways, specific ways, democratized and humanized and perhaps even civilized our theatre by their work? Have unprecedented and unusual themes have been explored by women theatre persons as distinct from the other kinds of persons? Have theatre in her hands becomes a new interrogative site? Now, these are some of the questions which may or may not be answered by them. It all depends. The rules of the game are that each one of them will speak initially for 10 to 12 minutes. Then, if they have anything to say to each other or about each other, or the remarks made by each other, then they'll have about 15 minutes of that. And then it will be open to you to ask questions, clarification, brief comments. So there you are. you have NEELAM MANSINGH, KIRTI JAIN, and Maya Rao. We start with NEELAM MANSINGh.
I think I've come to I want to show a bit of
Yeah?
excerpts,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
short excerpts.
As long as it is not a paper reading, it's fine.
You never know, sometimes you may just require that as a confidence measure more than anything else. How do we see it? some kind of imbalance between my standing and the podium. Thank you very much. I'm always asking myself, what is theatre? How do we do it? What's in it? I do not have any answers that could be considered even vaguely near to the questions that I pose. What I do know is that it is mysterious, elusive, and seems to define what I wish to articulate in my daily life and how I wish to live. I'm constantly searching through the process of my work that one image, that one moment that will elevate my senses and make me feel, yes, it's worth it. Whenever I start doing a play, I'm always uneasy that I must not resort to the familiar, repeat myself, uneasy with stereotypes and cliches, always afraid of settling into a situation that may not be original or innovative. I always think that the point of each rehearsal and directing a play was to be constantly in search for something new, something fresh, something unexpected. But then how do we circumvent cultural stereotypes that we inherit? How do we put them through the heat of transformation? Then I read an essay by T.S. Eliot, where he suggests that the artist's work is not always to choose something which is novel and something which is new, but rather how the artist handles the tradition that he or she inherits. I have been running my theatre group since the last 32 years. Earlier, my work was always based on what we call the well-made play with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Instructions were given to the actors, lines were memorized, scenes were choreographed, and there was this constant dialogue between us. This is not what I want. Or the actor would shout across the rehearsal space and ask me, is this what you want? This whole desire or the whole space that a director occupied about what he or she wants, in retrospect, seems like a very faulty kind of space that I felt I had put myself into. At the present moment, I'm guided more by what I do not want than what I want. What I want is still nebulous and uncertain, but the method that we employ during a work situation is improvisational. To create a common language of improvisation amongst the cast, I make it fairly clear that I do not require them to learn their lines. I give a kind of an idea or a suggestion which I hope that they will pick up and create a scene out of it or construct a certain kind of idea out of it. Sometimes the instructions that I give them are very close to what I've suggested. Sometimes they are in complete contradiction to what I have said. And sometimes it's a kind of a sketch which I can pull together, chisel, hammer, and make something out of it. Thus the creation becomes collective, it becomes collaborative, where everyone ensures maximum creativity in each function and sometimes centralizes it. And someone, I beg your pardon, centralizes it. I don't think in that situation my role as a director is diminishing, but I think the actor's responsibility is increasing. This is really about different functions. I think the role of the actor will remain fundamentally different from mine, but the dialogue and the conversation becomes equal, like the dialogue between two people fulfilling different functions. In most plays that we do, there's no single linear story that's being told, at least the kind of work that I'm moving towards or have moved towards. There are several stories being told at the same time. There is hardly any theatre production without a story. Even when you talk about a catastrophe, about pain, about darkness of the human condition, the very fact that we are performing it already shows the existence of hope. It is impossible to do theatre if one is not conscious of this element. Most of my recent work, by recent I mean since the last 6 years, has been about loss, has been about savagery, has been about fractured identities, has been about migration, subjects that would be considered dark and brooding. But within that, I as a director find it imperative to look for affirmations. No matter how hopeless the situation is, the actors are asked to bring a ray of hope, either by singing a song, or by birthing a child, or by cooking food, or by playing games. There lurks, far below, primal forces that may surface at any time. Civilization is a very thin crust, and the primitive and the savage exist side by side. Theatre began in the rites of ancient mysteries. Myths of antiquity were enacted. It is a secular art that has also within it elements of the sacred and the sacrilegious. We need poetry. Also need to accept the primal swamp that lies just beneath the surface. Most of the plays that I have directed ever since I can remember, I've hovered my narrative between illusion, between reality, fiction, dreams, the imaginary, and very strongly the mundane. There I may see the distorted mirror of truth, a reflection distorted by the intense magnification that expels reason in favor of extreme emotions, forbidden and unacceptable, that is stirring within the human consciousness. We may question the necessity and its truth. It is true, but not the whole truth. It is, however, a necessary means of reaching out to the truth. And what is that? Can it be found, if it could be found, in a universal language of theatre? If such a language existed, would it be common to all cultures, to all experiences? All theatre, like life, is a dream. A dream is a chaotic affair, a jumble of unconnected images with often impenetrable meanings or with no meanings at all. The director, through storytelling, tries to discover the order behind the chaos, the play within the play. Discovering this, for me, requires more than a theory of what theatre is. What really ultimately matters is what works on the stage. For me, and in my work, art is not a space where social or political evangelizing is done, whose objective is to achieve assent to a certain point of view. A theatrical production offers a point of view for the audience's own perception in a variety of ways. There is no single correct response, just as there is no single correct interpretation. To insist on living the life of the imagination, which becomes the riskiest and perhaps the only way to connect art to the world we live in. The rest is really current affairs. A theatre investigates contemporary social and political reality and the everyday struggles, and I do believe that whatever we work on is a reflection of our ethical, moral, and political space that we occupy. It's not that it sets out to tell a moral story. It provides a glimpse on a different way of perceiving the world we live in, on its vulnerabilities, on its uncertainties. A play gets dated very quickly, from acting styles to costumes to the grammar of the performance. Protocols of acting and ways of acting and performances and working are changing continuously. To get too attached to your work is to put all full stops on any possibility of growth, a closure to moving forward. Theatre, as we know, can only exist in the present. It is in the now. The actor is always present. He must play the present. of the characters in every instant on the stage. And I'd say this about everything we do. You cannot work in the theatre and ignore the news of the day, because I realize that you act in the moment, before the analysis, not after. Since the last 5-6 years, written plays are not suited to what I'm searching for. At the present time, it's an instinctive rejection, not a judgment. In the absence of a pre-established text, it's always difficult to decide when the production is over. When you move in undefined spaces, one thing you do recognize that this form of performance isn't as free as you thought it would be. Gradually one notices that as one is working, one is constantly making choices, erasing, adding, faltering. On the contrary, it is a search for a new language, and our continuity in our theatre group really lies in our abandoning the path that we have already tried. In these confused, uncertain days and the escalating local and global tensions, we seem to be in some sort of grayness, the onset of the dark ages. In negative times, we need to discover what was once contained in such hackneyed values as beauty, harmony, order, peace and joy. And a visit to the theatre, as a visit to a good dentist or a good doctor or a good meal with a good friend, should leave one feeling better on the way out than one felt on the way in. Thank you.
कैसे ऑन होता है? It's not just that. After a very reflective paper from NEELAM, I am more nervous than ever. Mine will be very mundane compared to that. But in a way, she's also made my task easier, because my journey also is very similar. Both of us having trained at NSD, we were trained into a very conventional method of direction, where the director was the one who decided everything for the team. And therefore it seemed like a very one-way process. You were giving, you were deciding, you were interpreting, and the others were only responding to what you wanted them to do. And when I remember my first 10-15 years of theatre work, I feel so embarrassed about what I was doing, because there was just nothing of conviction in it. I was doing it because I felt I have been trained, and therefore I must do something. But from within me, there was nothing that was really pushing me to say what I wanted to say, because it seemed too one-directional. And then I remember that I got into theatre and studying theatre because I rejected the conventional education, since it did not connect to my life. And I'd come here in search of that connection into theatre. And then I was doing theatre which did not again connect to my life. And I was not learning anything. I mean, when I was doing theatre, it was too one way for me to learn. And it was just an accident that once I had to take on a production of a play, which the text I knew very well. I'd been teaching for 10 years. But I hadn't prepared, so I hadn't done my blocking on paper. I hadn't been able to prepare what I will ask the actors to do. And I was into the rehearsal space. And suddenly I felt that let's try it some other way. So this was totally an accident. I was lucky that I had very good actors. And we began with the process that NEELAM said, that you think of situations, you tell them what situation you want them to play, and suddenly they come out with an improvisation where the relationship is revealed to be something very different from what you would have imagined it to be. And that was very exciting, that I didn't think of that. It could also, so this situation could be played like this. And every day there was something new, several new things happening. And for the first time in that process, I felt excited that I was learning. There were dimensions being added to what I was doing, to what they were doing, and the text was opening up in a way that I had just not imagined. And that became more challenging because then you had to look for more situations, more ways of taking them in directions which were unexplored, opening up the text in many more different ways, and it was very exciting. So I'll talk about that production slightly later when I also show some slides. But for me, that became the point from where I think something in my imagination unlocked, kind of unshackled. And that point onwards, I started feeling I don't have to look for a dramatic text. Earlier I was always searching, kaun sa natak kare, what should we really do? Now it was, whatever I was reacting to in things around me, I wanted to decide that I want to share it, but how to share it, So something is happening, it's disturbing me, but I don't have a story through which to tell. So then I would look for material, I would read hundreds of stories, I would read articles, I would read newspapers, where I could, for instance, I started wanting to work on partition and why so much silence around partition in the performing arts in India. Couldn't find anything till I landed, and I must have read about hundreds of stories. I landed on, Urvashi's book, The Other Side of Silence, which has interviews of live survivors. And that answered a lot of the questions that were there in my mind, and I decided this is what I want to do. Now, how do you go about it? You have to structure it. So we got together a team, and with the team we started exploring each of those interviews, what areas it opened, and we decided to focus area. But what I'm just saying is that this transition from one way of directing, where director was the undisputed leader, to a collaborative work happened totally by accident, and that accident really led to discovering a new language, a new approach, a new relationship to the team, where everybody had an equal voice. The collaboration made it so much more richer, because every day we would see multiple viewpoints for every little line of text, for every little word of the text, and every situation, in every silence. So that for me was really the turning point. And this turning point led to taking up non-dramatic text, which I feel is quite central to most of the work that I have done. I have hardly done any plays unless it was required that I do a written play, because then it was issues which bothered me, which I would take up in theatre, and then try to look for material which could be turned into a play, or request some people to write a play, some people who are here, because once again I felt that I got drawn to, number one, that I felt it's not enough to have an issue and the actors and then to develop a play. I just felt that we do need a writer, because the writer gives it a kind of, one, that the writer can give it a story, a narrative, and the writer can give it words which go, which can be further explored. So the writer's intervention allows another layering to what work you might be wanting to do or are doing. So I always need somebody who will do the text for us, which will then be further explored, apart from the situations, the words to be explored by the actors. So always in search of a writer. Gitanjali is here. She's, worked on some of the scripts she did for us. Why I was drawn to more women writers was I felt that it was so much easier to communicate to them what you wanted, the kind of structures you wanted, the kind of narratives you wanted, and the kind of breaking of stereotypes you wanted, the kind of nuancing that you wanted. So it was much easier, is what I found from experience, and therefore was on the lookout. So two of the plays that I did were based on novels, Subarnalata by Asha Purna Devi and Hamara Sheher Us Baras by Gitanjali. Both were dramatized by Gitanjali Shri. Another play, Aur Kitne Tukde, was dramatized by B. Gauri, who was one of our actresses, and another play, Baghdad Burning, which was based on an internet blog by this name about America's occupation of Iraq, was done by Supriya Pathak, who was also an actress in that play. And all of them had, Gauri and Supriya had a facility with writing. And one found that, sort of a very light humor, a lightness of touch, a kind of lack of ego. It worked wonderfully in terms of a collaboration. And that was something that worked very well for me. And then basically non-dramatic texts allowed you to play around with the structure. Though NEELAM says that it's not as open as you think, but I do think that it allows you to explore areas, even those which, sort of, you can, like a river finds spaces and crevices where it can just flow. It's a kind of that free flow that you find a little space and you can maybe expand that. And sometimes it's so dependent, I found, on actors, that something which doesn't exist in the narrative, but an actor creates it. And if the actor is imaginative enough, he or she almost becomes central to that narrative, because he has or she has managed to find spaces where his or her story becomes central. I found that very, very fascinating. For instance, in a play I did called Tinka Tinka, which was totally based on research on the Bhuj earthquake, basically to sensitize students about what loss and displacement can mean. After the casting, there was one boy who said that, can I enter as a small child? And I said, of course you can enter, because it was all being improvised anyway. And then he started entering any kind of space, any scene, any time. But with his imagination, he made it so poignant that I think he became central to that experience of what it meant to lose everything, what it meant to lose the family, the space, the familiar, everything. And he was not part of the scenes that we had visualized at all. So what I'm saying is that this freedom, which, taking different kind of texts that is allowed, I find that very fascinating, because then you have the freedom to, play around with characters. And so in this whole thing, what was fascinating for me is that relationships fascinate me, sort of individuals fascinate me, what happens between people fascinates me, the chemistry fascinates me. And to be able to actually, if you're directing a play and if you've directed 10 plays, and let's say an average of 10 characters in each play, you're actually living through 100 lives through the process of that production. So to be able to live that, to be able to experience the points of view of so many people, and then if there are different actors, that many more lives, it is something which was very, very rewarding. And I felt that, sort of this is what I wanted from theatre. This is what connects me and makes it so valuable for me. So this whole process of exploring multiple perspectives, multiple meanings, multiple layers, was something which I found important. And one more thing which has fascinated me is how central the use of space and objects is to my work. It's very central, I noticed from their work, in NEELAM's work and Maya's work too, but I think in mine in a more, let's say more, maybe mundane way, but it kind of gives me a center, it kind of gives me a way to proceed. That's when I'll just show some slides. Now this is, my slides are not very rich, but this is a slide from this production of Lehron Ke Rajhans. As I said that, sort of, I had read the text and I had seen several productions of the play, but I always felt that having dealt with it in a realistic manner took away from the central idea of the play, which was about the conflict between spirituality that Buddha represented in the play and the materiality that Sundari represents, the conflict between the two. And I felt that we need to bring the conflict, the abstract concept of this conflict center stage. So I felt that it should be not played in a realistic space. And then I'm happy that Reina is here. Reina was the set designer, and we, sort of thought about what kind of space should be designed for this production. And I told him that we need to have a greater presence of Buddha on the stage in some way or the other through the play. And that's when he hit upon this idea of the Buddhist mandal. So there was a square and there were four, sort of in this passages, but otherwise there are just those four. So it was this kind of formal space that he created. Now once this space was, and then we of course had this jhula, which represented Sundari's space, and there was that pole covered with a saffron cloth which represented Nan's space, and a off-white stage. So we made it very formal, but the moment and there was a chorus sitting at the back, because the other thing that kept happening was that the moment I thought of this performance and a kind of presence of Buddha, I kept hearing a chant throughout. And I thought that for that chant I need a chorus, and the moment you have a chorus you can't have a realistic space at all. So having done that, I realized that I need to change the acting style, so everything then got guided by the fact that we decided to have a formal space. And that was also a great learning experience for me, to see that how one thing connects to the next and how everything impacts everything else. So just, and so in this I just want to mention funny things that happen, that I wanted very strongly to decorate this jhula with Harsingar ke phool. Now the team went mad trying to look for artificial Harsingar ke phool, and they wondered why. I didn't know why. But somewhere at the back of my mind, I felt that that flower, which was a flower we have been with since childhood, represented the purity, the color, I don't know what all, but somehow I felt it should be there. So of course we couldn't get Harsingar, but the same color combination and the delicacy we tried to. So what I'm saying is sometimes, and it seemed at that point that agar ye nahi mila to phir kaise hoga production, which was quite stupid. Nobody would have noticed, nothing would have happened. But you start feeling that it's so important to your work. So just 2-3 slides you can jump. So just choice, very minimal choice of properties through the production. Though actually the written play is in a real bedroom. So, a lot of small details. The actors had a real problem working without any small props and objects. But then the whole style had to be changed. Next. Now, this was the other plays, Subarnalata. So, why I'm saying the space and the objects is that Subarnalata is about this very young girl who gets married, who's married off at the age of 9 and is in the in-laws' house, and how she suffers, and, sort of, that she doesn't even know what marriage means. And there's a whole description of her childhood. And we didn't know that the rest of the narrative was pretty long. We didn't know how to bring about the fact that she lives in another world, that she is a child, and what her psychology is. So just to bring that about, we had 2 little dolls for her doll world, and we discussed a lot between us that what would be her private space in her in-laws' house, jahan pe wo gudiyon se khelti hogi. So she said maybe under a table, maybe under the bed, and so sort of we designed a table where. So this is under the table. Sorry, can you move back? This is under the table where she has her constant dialogue with her dolls. So it's just a beginning small piece where she talks with the dolls, plays with the dolls, enacts the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law scenes where she gets angry. Now the same prop, the table under which her private world is, when the mother-in-law comes and sits on top, it was also meant to denote domination, her keeping an eye on the whole household, and the way she is kept under check, her freedom is kept under check. So for me, these things used to add a lot to how I was looking at the narrative and what I was trying to do with it. So now this is, in this I'll just talk about one prop. This is Aur Kitne Tukde. This is the story of one girl, Sadia, who is abducted. A Muslim girl abducted into a Hindu household. She gets married into a farmer kind of family. She comes from an urban family, but she's abducted into this household. So now, when we thought of what property would help her live this through or represent, or what property to work with, we tried several things. What we finally kept was this charpai. Now, her entire life then played around this charpai, where this is when the childhood, she's remembering her childhood, that she used to play and how she used to jump on the charpai. Am I taking too long? What's the time?
I have no idea.
This is when the husband has dragged her from the border, so the charpai becomes the border and she's being dragged into. This is her life, which has become, sort of centered around the household and so, woven and interwoven into all kinds of knots. This when she's given a choice, she's been waiting that her brother will take her back. When actually the policeman comes to take her, the choice is between the safety of the house where she's living and this insecurity of where he'll take her. She chooses to stay on. So in effect, she has killed all her hope. So we also use the charpai as her coffin, where she lies down, where her hope is killed. Now, sort of the entire narrative got built around the charpai. In one place, one city where we had gone to play, we couldn't get a charpai like this. We got one with a plastic weaving. We had to play with that, and we were so unhappy because I don't know whether the audience noticed, but for us, it was reflecting all the rawness, the roughness, the drudgery, the, sort of everything that her life was all about. And with those plastic things, it was just so synthetic, it just didn't work. So I mean, all these things also happen. Similarly, with another character, we were playing that she's a social worker, so how do we communicate? That she had large amounts of cloth to deal with, she was stitching, so. And then that same kind of cloth image works when she's raped and her breasts are cut when she's traveling. So then that gives the color. And, yeah. Now this was another prop which happened by accident. We were working in a school when we were rehearsing. This slide came in as when we were playing about games, childhood memory, what kind of games children play, etc. This came in just as part of that. And then we built a whole scene around it, that how children remember that some women had jumped into the well, but actually they're just remembering and finding it funny. They're enacting what their dadi has told them or bua has told them. But then that scene turns into the scene where this woman jumps. So then it turns into the actual well, where all the women are lying dead. And that same woman, how she feels outcast, because she jumps into the well, but she doesn't die because there's too little water, too many women who have jumped. So she survives, and the rest of her 50 years, till Urvashi interviewed her, she has lived as an outcast because people felt that she did not become a martyr, and therefore nobody wanted to really interact with her. So she lived as a social outcast. So she used to use these glasses to talk, I mean, a household thing, to recall the well and to, sort of talk about how her life has been like that well every day, where she jumps. Okay, I think, I think I have overshot, I'm not sure. So I will, and sometimes what happens is that these properties and spaces are so organic that if, we've started with something and accidentally, let's say a chair has come into the rehearsal and it's a broken chair. Now we have worked it so much into the production that if we don't get a broken chair, the production falls apart. We don't know what to do. So this also happens in the process of making properties and objects central to the work that you are doing. It always reminds me of an anecdote that when I learned driving, I used to learn it without my shoes on. So when I started driving, I always had to take off my shoes and drive because I couldn't drive with my shoes on. I had not learned it that way. So I was telling a friend of mine that, it's such a problem, I can't drive with my shoes on, and in summers it's so hot. She says, oh, yours is still better. मैंने तो जो चप्पल पहन के सीखा था मैं वो ही ना पहनूं तो मैं चला ही नहीं सकती. So I think हमारे थिएटर में कभी-कभी ऐसी situations भी आती हैं. Thank you.
Mayaji?
not going to let technology get the better of us, as it does in every production. Thank God this is not a play, because if it was a production, kuch na kuch gadbad zarur hoga. I will start by stating the obvious, because today is such a day. शरीयत के बारे में बहस हो रही है, 377 भी कहीं सीधा हो जाएगा, and the bus gang rape, and I can't help but state the very, very obvious, which is that there's no other art form but theatre. There's no other art form where we come on stage with our flesh and blood, with our body. कुछ ऐसा लग रहा है कि आज उसको दोबारा restate करने की बड़ी ज़रूरत है. And it's only because it is today. And of course we're living through times where every day is another day. I wish it was exciting. It's sometimes so horrifying, but in that horror one must find excitement. And that's part of what keeps us artists going, I think, is looking for the contradiction. We live it, and we must re-find it in the rehearsal space. And that's our job. But having said that, I'm going to keep this here because I don't want to overstep, and you please give me a 2-minute warning. Yes, so the body. I just wanted us to go through. So picking up a Manto play, a Manto story, a father searching for his daughter. A Nigerian short story, Adichie, a daughter returning after completing higher studies and the mother tearing her hair out. Kya kare is bachchi ka? She's come with newfangled ideas about how she wants to get married. All this is fine. But when 2002 comes upon you, when 2012 comes upon you, and it's all about the body, somehow as a performer, the body shrank. And that has been, for me, the biggest challenge. How does this performer's body that's supposed to be big and you're supposed to fill it up with your alphabet, with what you want to say, discover how you will say it, find different ways of saying it, and on stage, night after night, maybe change the way you'll do it. And then there's something else happening in life which makes the body shrink. And I think for me, somewhere this contradiction has, in a strange way, also been exciting. A lot of what I'm going to say is looking at it from hindsight, trying to put a lens on what I've done, because I haven't had a director for 25 years. One just goes through the motion, one just gets into an empty room, shuts the door, plays some music, try and get a stranger if possible, somebody's music you don't know, and say, "Aajao, kuch bajaiye, dekhte hain kya hota hai," and to try and go on a journey. Or a filmmaker, and the filmmaker doesn't come in with clips, no, because that becomes too easy. The filmmaker must come in and only look at things around himself or herself in the room and project back onto a wall of things that he finds in the room. It could be the lines on my hand, it could be the pore of his skin, but to magnify something that we don't see with the naked eye, so that another light is thrown on it and will throw me as a performer to discover something else. So I've tried to put together today. It's the same images. All three of us were talking about this. कैसे आज की बात को कैसे दूसरी तरह से बोला जाए. We've all done these talks so many times. We've all shown images. We've all shown clips. How do you come back to a talk and reinvent yourself? And for me, the way to do it was to think of these three big events that are playing out in our lives at this moment. Now, in the late 70s, which is when I set out in theatre, having finished an MA, there were no references. We had no references of women performers. There was only Surekha Sikri, and I'd seen her on stage. But something told me, I admired her, but something told me that's not the kind of theatre I'm going to be doing. I had no idea what kind of theatre I would do, but wo nahi hoga. So there were next to no references. In terms of characters, again next to no references. At one end there was Shakespeare. We had all read Shakespeare in school, so there might have been a Juliet and there might have been a Rosalind. And at the other end, there was a Shakuntala, or a Draupadi, or a Kunti. And in between these two, we hung in limbo. And it felt like a very large space. And having come from a background of Kathakali and having only done male roles, there was yet another contradiction that you unknowingly grab onto. That you want to come on stage, at least in the beginning, you want to come on stage with no costume, just what you wear. Pata nahi ye dimag mein tha, just what you wear ke saath stage pe chadna chahiye. That you will come, and it's actually something like Kathakali. Kathakali also says, come on stage without any prop, no props, no set. Come out of the darkness, it says. And then make the world come alive for the audience. But of course here we were, Badal Sarkar had started talking about a language of theatre. Thoda bahut usko bhi karke dekha. But somewhere there was this, yes, this contradiction that we must stand there with, and we did wear black all the time. Any play that you did, and we started life in the 70s in street theatre, so that you must be completely recognizable, but that you come from a form where you're completely unrecognizable. Because in Kathakali they say it's only by looking at the fingers and maybe a ring or the feet or the toes that you can tell who's the actor playing tonight. So I think somewhere in my mind this contradiction was very exciting. I had no other, I had no drama school training. The only training I had was Kathakali. And so from that complete masking into, and I'm talking urban theatre now, city mein kis kisam ka theatre karna chahiye, it felt like I said we have to strip ourselves to the barest. Okay. Okay, so this is where life started. It started with street theatre, and somewhere I think street theatre set the trend for some of us. I think from there on, some of us weren't looking to play to look for characters that were specific, that had a very specific setting in a home, of a class, of a profession, of a way of thinking. There was something about street theatre that had yet another contradiction, that there is an individual there in space, but the setting, the landscape is big, is huge, is social, is political. And how do you swing from this very particular, the particular of the moment, I won't even say character, the moment. So, you know, for instance, we would call this the Chakki moment. It's not about Kanchan. Kanchan was the name of the girl who died this is Om Swaha, the dowry play, we wouldn't call it the Kanchan moment, we would call it the Chakki moment. So Chakki mein pisti rahegi became the way in which I think for me opened the doors to a way of theatre making, that you thought in images. Because in street theatre, that's what we would do. We would just go into a space and try out something. It wasn't about, let's think of a moment, let's think about what's happening in that moment, let's think about what are the relationships, which is one kind of theatre, definitely. But because we had started out in street theatre, and some of this, what I'm saying now, actually, I haven't thought of this before. It was in trying to prepare the talk today that it came home to me that because life started in street theatre, it kind of set the way in which one would make theatre from there on. So this thing about the moment and the landscape, I think that kind of stayed with me and does so. So there was Khol Do. Again, it's a moment. वो moment है दुपट्टा खोने का moment. There's so much residing in that moment. It resonates with so much. Who loses what? Who gains what? It's a moment, but set. If it wasn't set in that huge landscape of partition, I don't think I would have been driven to. I would have been excited enough to go and find out what is embedded in that story. ये किस तरह से इसको किया जाए, खोजा जाए, actually खोजा जाए. And that somewhere, for me, the first few plays, and I think this was true of a lot of people doing theatre in the early 80s, the stage becomes this place for discovery. You are in your rehearsal room, and it is in the process of looking for images, improvising, going into another world, that you're actually refining your own thinking as a person. I think in the 80s, I wasn't at all a very articulate person. I don't think I still am to a great extent. But I am the most articulate when I'm in the rehearsal space. Meaning that you're finding who you are. You're never doing theatre about yourself. We would never want to do theatre about ourselves, who we are, our class. नहीं, उससे दूर रहना है. But the who we are and how we thought. We all knew, I mean, in the dowry play, all of us knew that when we go to a college and play, the first thing that they're going to note is that these are all women for whom dowry and dowry deaths is not a reality. And yet, so then we are going there very clearly with an art form. And I was particularly, I remember feeling very aware, and I remember that moment when this Kanchan, the girl who died, her mother was sitting in the audience, and after the 40-minute Om Swaha was over, she came on stage, she grabbed me off the ring, she put me next to her, she shoved my head on her lap, and she thumped me really hard. She thought it was painful. And it was in that moment so many realizations which I don't want to go into now. And of course, very primarily, this thing that we keep talking about, the responsibility of the artist. मैं क्या कर रही हूँ? What am I doing to this mother? And what is my role as an artist? And who am I as a woman? And where is my place in a landscape of men, women, society, politics? So, you know, and all these cross-cutting things. We never thought gender, of course, those days. वो लफ्ज़ ही नहीं था. We didn't even have feminism as a word. It was women's liberation. And of course, when I was in college, these two words became, again, two big pillars for us. One was women's liberation and one was Marxism. So ये भी इतने बड़े landscape के अंदर हम खोज रहे हैं, and letting the moment resonate with the landscape, and back and forth. That became, so here again, although I didn't realize it, but it doesn't seem like a contradiction. It doesn't seem like a surprise. But I didn't go for playing Sakina. One went for getting into the skin of the father. And the father, of course, carries his dupatta, her dupatta, on his back. This is the job by Brecht, based on a true incident. Again, you know, your theatre becomes the platform, the space in which you're discovering what lies on this continuum between man and woman. What are all the moments? And so when you pick up a quote, and when you're in, Brecht has a beautiful line, it takes millennia to make a man, but it takes not more than a day to make, something like, it doesn't take a day for a woman to become a man, but it takes millennia for a man to become a man. So I show this image because even then there wasn't this thing ki quote pehen ke aadmi ban jate hain, because it's a story about a woman who lives her life as a man for 12 years. But you're standing in your rehearsal room with your body. There's obviously some kind of awareness of yourself, and that's why I keep talking about the body. You're holding that coat and you're talking to it. But it felt like the moment you wear it, it's like it's gone then, it's finished. The thing is to play, to struggle. What keeps us all as theatre people going is that tension between either it's a co-actor or it's a prop. And I think for the longest time with me, this continuum of man and woman, and this, not as opposites, and all that lies in between, was a lot of what I was searching for. And this is the same in the job. These are 20 ande put into some 10 kilos of atta. Somebody gave me this recipe, and if it's kneaded very well, it can stretch and it won't break. So it stretches it really challenges your physical strength, and of course as you play with it, it is such an unusual object that it takes you into an unusual zone. And here is this woman who must be a night watchman in a factory and find her masculinity through that atta, which is of course a female thing. It's something that women deal with on a daily basis. So these kind of contradictions would excite me. And this was another one. This is an actor, a woman actor looking for the character of Ravana. So what lies between? What lies between this single woman and a man with 10 heads? I have to say, and this is, I mean, it may be of interest, people may want to talk about it later. I found increasingly this business of, I want to show more skin. Of course, when you're in your room, you are in touch with your skin. And it's your skin that is another sort of exciting thing to fight against. But somehow, that same skin that you work with, when you put it out there, it feels different. And it has a way of resonating. And of course, as the times changed, and particularly in today's times, there's so many ways in which the body is getting lit, unlit, silhouetted. I'm not going to say battered and bashed and all of that. That even more, this business of the actor, the performer, I don't say actor. We changed our terminology as well at some point. We were no more the actor. We were the performer. And I think somewhere there was the kind of grabbing more space for ourselves, that we are not there an actor who's going to be directed, if you like, but we're going to be a performer who will create the world and bring you into an experience, and hopefully there'll be something that together we will experience in the unfolding of the production. So this is a moment from a rock show called A Deep Fried Jam, which became a Deeper Fried Jam. And in September, please come to see another version of, it won't be the deepest, because well, one has far to go before the deepest, but yet another deeper. And this is a woman who's so in amazement of the dancer, so everything she does, are you going to understand it? Will you? Yeah, you know what she means? She's the dancer. You better know who she is. Okay? So the terror of the diva, and the woman looking at the diva that she wants to become, and the terror that she may become, and the excitement of becoming that terror, and the knowledge that I may get locked into it, and will I be able to free myself? All this becomes very exciting. And this is, I was asked by, this is again interesting, I'm showing these pictures partly because it's also talking about the time, so I think this is somewhere in the 90s where the UN says, will you please make a show on masculinities? And of course my first question was, why me? And they said, no, you're a performer, which was a very good thing to say. I'm a performer, I'm not woman. So performer, please make a performance around masculinities. And this for me, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I was with, and he's sitting right here, Amitesh, and a sound designer. So 2 men, 1 woman, and again we're back to looking at the spectrum of the male to female. And for me it was a very, an even more exciting exercise, because the performance has to be about gender. It has to be about the play. And the play of the sexes, the play of... I'm still not... This is telling. One doesn't play trans. You don't... I wouldn't play transgender. I wonder why. It just came to me just now. And this is again politics. This is again personal and the social and the political. Yeah, I wouldn't play trans. But I have been asked by a lesbian community, ki Maya aao, make comedy about. So I said, you know, I'm not a lesbian, so isn't it better that a lesbian makes comedy about, and maybe that was a wrong question. She said, no, you're the theatre person. You have to do it. You come into our community and you make fun of us. And there's something here that I think is very telling, and I want to share this. There's something about the theatre performer, I feel this very strongly, that when one is in that space, you aren't heterosexual, homosexual, trans. I've been in a film and it came as a very great surprise to me. This is the power of theatre. I was asked by the director, you must create positions of the Kama Sutra. So here's the girl, Maya, shot is ready, go kiss her. And when I went and I kissed her, smack on her mouth, and she told me it's going to be a close-up. And when I came out of it, I wondered for a moment, how come I wasn't hesitant? And it's what NEELAM called the mysteries of theatre. That it is true, and this may sound very high-minded, but there is something about theatre that can take you to a zone where you are larger than yourself. I think it's completely true. I know I won't be able to physically feel like a trans person because I am not bodily that. But in theatre we say, we can play anything. So you see, there isn't the attempt of playing a man. It's about finding the masculinity in you. This was my great lesson from doing that production with Amitesh and Oshin. That it made it possible for me to find masculinities in me and let it come to the surface and play with them. This is a part of the same production. We broke up a long image of a man, and this is about the son wanting to be in his father's image. How can he? His father is too large for him. He can't even begin to see where the whole of his father. कहाँ से बाप को पकड़ा जाए कि he can grow up and become a man in his father's image. This is Lady Macbeth, who again, if I had sat at a desk and tried to think about this, it would never have come to me. But it was in improvising with music that it came to me that this woman is doing strange things. If you look at the text, Shakespeare is giving you no reason why why things unfold in a certain way. And after a point, she's just completely alone. And one day in playing with her, it came to me that she must be a witch. She has to be the fourth witch. We all know this, and it came to me again, this very big realization that when we are in circumstances that are alien to ourselves, we end up doing actions that are unfamiliar to ourselves. We may even do actions that we completely dislike, would never have anything to do with, but we continue doing them because the circumstances within which we are compelling us in a way that we can't even begin to recognize who we are and what we are. And so for me, that was the story of Lady Macbeth. She didn't know how to, it's a video piece, anyway, I won't go into details. And then came this, I'm jumping quite a bit, I would like to talk about what the camera did for me. And the one thing, and I won't go into the rest, it brought the world into the rehearsal room in a very acutely, what should I say, reflective way. It further helped me reflect and look, because the camera was showing up things that my naked eye had never seen. So it felt like a bit of like being in a laboratory. I don't know what it is to be in a chemistry laboratory, but this business of looking through a microscope. We tell our students of acting very often, you got your whole body, you know what it can do, but you'd never ever know. You talk to I've talked to my liver for 7 years, but I've never seen the damn thing. And the beauty of that I'll talk to it, I'll know it's how it's shrunk, how a parasite is biting into it on a daily basis, how my kidneys are working or not working, you talk to them. But the beauty of it is that you must never ever see them. And I think that's another, it's certainly something that gives me a huge amount of excitement, that I will never know what's in there, but I can go around investigating कि आज 377 के बारे में क्या वहाँ बोला गया कोर्ट के अंदर, मैं हर लफ्ज़ को स्टडी कर सकती हूँ. Yeah. So the camera. And then of course, these wonderful objects that, I say I'm a solo performer, there is no director, you've got to look for playmates. One playmate was the camera, the other playmate were objects. And so, particularly objects that have a history. And so here's this woman with her very fancy parasol, and she's on a cycle rickshaw, and it's come all the way from Durban, and it's made by telephone ke tar, which is plucked off the wire, the thing in the night. It's stolen, and then these women very quickly craft cane around it, and it's an object to be sold on the footpath the next morning. Now, when it's so embossed with a history like that, and then you bring it onto the floor to play with, it's already resonating with so much that it's bound to you. You trust that it's going to speak to you in a different language when you start playing with it. And so yeah, so this is just to show you in the rehearsal room. So there is the object, and there's a mirror, and yeah, they're all just very simple. This is way back 2000, 2005, yeah. Yes, so then the camera and these little people. These little people have changed my life hugely, hugely. So you go to the Emporia, you go look. Firstly, you find this thing about randomness. I think that's why probably all of us call the stage an empty stage. We want it to be empty so that a randomness can come into it. That every new moment will be a surprise. That if somebody throws a streak of light into it, it will be a surprise. You have to start empty. And I think that's probably why, and also because of the start in street theatre, that you don't want a set. You don't want a whole lot of things defining the space within which you will do an action that is defined by that set. If you have a sofa and two chairs, I'm talking about way back. Today, of course, palat gaya hai. So when you have a sofa and two chairs and a pot of tea, theatre has moved so far ahead that when you look at that pot of tea and the cup and the chair, it looks different. And whether you will start from under the chair or whether you will start with your legs curling over the handles of the sofa. But we came from, I mean, in the 70s, the only playwright we knew of that's in the Hindi belt was Mohan Rakesh and Adi Adure, and it was a kind of box set. It had to have that sofa and those two chairs for those characters to play out their lives. Anyway, so these, 2 minutes. So these lovely people, and then you play with them, and of course they become large as life with the camera. She's tiny. And this is, well, in short, this is about, again, a wonderful contradiction about construction sites where people may live there for 6 months building a big hotel and babies get born. A jhule bhi hote hain. Or a chota sa mobile crash ka kuch ek school bhi hoga. But once the last screw is put into that toilet or the last golden knob on the reception desk, that's the day none of them will ever go into that space again. But till then, that's their home. So these, yeah, contradictions. Helping this woman construct her house for her while she doesn't have the time for it. Yes, the camera brought back to me the 9 women which we were reading about in the papers, but somehow when that clip was played in the rehearsal room and when I held a Manipuri dupatta in my hands with all its lovely flower and leaf work on it and played with it, these 9 naked women came to life in a very different kind of way. And I'd like to actually, after many years now, relive some of these productions, because only to discover with you as audience what resonance it may have today. And I'm sure it does, but I don't know what it is, and I'd rather it be a mystery, like NEELAM says. Okay, so then of course this hitting above and often below the belt. And then you must start with the very big. So this was one reworking of Mayavati, her favorite green. This was early days of when our Prime Minister was still a Chief Minister, and when he was opening the doors for industry into Gujarat. This woman in her mini dress was telling you exactly how to make a dish. Now, the the challenge in comedy is you must do, for me, you must do an action that is very far away from the text. So the text must play out the industry, or play, no, sorry, the action must play out the recipe, and you must follow it to the T. And the text has to be simply about how Gujarat is opening up for industry to walk in. Pani ka problem nahi hoga. And those were the days, you remember, it seems very long ago, days of innocence, when he was saying women are emaciated because they don't eat enough, and so on. I don't think, frankly, I don't think there's anything better than comedy. I've chosen these two. These are the closest I've come to playing characters. This is my grand aunt Parvati Amma, who's the inspiration of my life. Sanskrit scholar, Calicut. And so I can play her any number of times. I can reinvent her. She speaks to me. She's in another world now, but she speaks to me in a very live way. I can see some Malayalis here nodding their head. And this is Quality Street, Chimamanda's mother who can't take it anymore, that her. This is as close I've come to playing a character. These are not characters. These are worlds unto themselves. And it's about body and how endlessly you can feel good with two pieces of cucumber that you and I know from way back in the days of the Illustrated Weekly of India. The two pieces of cucumber went on your eyes, but of course, in this production, it could go into so many other rounded parts. The NRI jogger, she's a phenomenon. This is the advertisement of. I don't need to write my own biography anymore because all I need to is to be cool, feel cool. This is the Navarasa expert who can get utterly carried away in Pibatsa. And and finally, of course, and just a few images of how that empty space can become a space of learning. For children, for adults, how do you break up? How do you use the devices of theatre to create learning for children where the teacher is not directing the learning? And we all know this because we've all played house. We've all played Mummy, Papa and Doctor, Patient, and nobody ever told us to play them. And we could do it for hours. And as you know, I mean, a lot of you know the story, that they found that if that is the case, then we need to make this kind of drama into a pedagogical methodology and understanding and devices. And so there's this whole world of drama for learning, which so excited me at a point that I gave up doing stage theatre on the stage. Because in this kind of theatre, you never repeat, there's no performance, there's no rehearsal. Because you live the moment for real in front of that bunch of kids today. You create a character, tomorrow it'll be somebody else, and day after it'll be somebody else, because it is the children who call the shots and ask for how to carry on with the investigation of whatever theme it is they're investigating. So you have to call upon all your faculties to live a moment. I wouldn't even say to play it. So finally, these are moments from Pandita Ramabai, which was, you all know about her, and characters. I wouldn't say meeting, they were struggling. Children were arguing with freedom fighters about, that's Pandita herself, about why the school that they were supporting should not be shut down. And as you know, Pandita was one of those early pioneers who created a whole home for child widows. And anyway, I won't go into all that. So this is a great journey for our actors. How to sit so close to children, stay within the belief of your character, don't be disturbed, and they're sitting right there. वो कोई भी सवाल पूछ सकते हैं, कुछ भी आपको बोल सकते हैं, and you'll have to remain so intensely. I mean, I don't think there's any better lesson in characterization than this, that you have to be in the moment and you have to respond to that child in a way that it will be both of learning and yet of immersion. That she will be able to, the child will be able to immerse herself in a moment of history and yet be able to learn something that will be of deepening her own understanding of how to be a child today. Okay. Yeah, well, now we are on this big fat stage right now in this country where, and it's very interesting in terms of gender, because when it is cow vigilantism, you know you're talking about a whole lot of men who are getting killed. I feel after having done the walk that since Om Swaha, the way in which one has come through, that was about the dowry, and soon after there came a play around rape, and that was in 1980. 2012 we're doing, I do the walk. Somehow the stage has become a place not of performing, but of reflection. And for me, the walk is not about performing. It is about just, I don't know how best to say this, of just being there. Because life has taken over the playing. Even yesterday, the way in which those channels were, वो 2012 में 9 बजे bus में फिर the horror in the bus, then patak diya, and then naked, and then Singapore hospital, and then this kind of tak event. It's like playing out 10 scenes of a third-rate script. So then it feels like on stage, your job is something else. Because in some sort of strange fashion, they've taken over your job. Thank you.
Well, this could have gone on. And I'm sorry, I have to be the timekeeper, because otherwise we'll be thrown out without finishing. So thank you very much. I think it was a very rich, very rich, exciting presentation that we had from 3 of our theatre persons. Now we have 20 minutes for questions. The questions have to be brief. Not long comments. You will have to carry your opinion with you, and we will not be able to allow you to share your opinion with us. But what you can ask for is a clarification or a question. The first one has to take the courage, and then everything follows. Yes, who is the first one? And where is the first one? Oh, there it is, yes. I'll just wait for a moment. The mic will reach you. Take the mic. Speak into it. Yes.
Hi, I'm Darpan Majumdar. My question is to you, Maya. Maya, can you explain this spectrum of man and woman, and how do you see it?
You want to collect more questions, or you want each one to answer?
I think collect
Maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then, yes, is there any other? Oh, come on. You can't be so stunned, are you? Well, Maya, you answer, maybe somebody will take. You take the mic. You, of course, averse to it, but anyway.
It's very difficult to talk about. And like I said, it's about setting yourself very special circumstances. It's about, how you, if it's a quote that suggests nothing, it's about how you throw it on the chair and there's going to be only you. And really as an actor, I find it's about what in the playing with that quote that I may discover in the pocket, which of course I haven't actually put there, but you put your hand in, and if you pull out from it, I don't know, a knife that you had used against your brother. What I mean is each moment reveals itself as it comes up. And you find yourself investigating this spectrum even as you discover, even as you're improvising. All I can say is, in doing this kind of thing, you find, like I said, you find a lot of masculinity in yourself. You find so many different kinds of shapes and sizes and spectrums and prisms, and the more you play with it, the more there is to discover. And I just want to share this with you. When I did the walk, when I made the walk in a very short time, but once I played it quite a few times, one afternoon I told myself, if I don't sit quietly and to some extent try and not get into the skin of one of those 6 men, but get as close to it as possible, maybe there's something about the walk that's incomplete. And to whatever extent possible, I did it. And I can tell you, when I came out of it, I didn't think like a lot of people would say, and I myself said, oh my God, what a horror. It's unbelievable what they were doing. The kinds of things they were putting up her, for lack of a better word. But when I came out of that experience feeling, yeah, it is possible. And you have to be very, very desperate. You have to be in a place of great despair, and it can happen. So all I'm saying is that somewhere it's the practice of theatre that allowed me to realize that it's no great horror and it's no great, "Arey Baba, kaise kiya?" And I feel very far away from those 6 men. No, I think at some level, it is. I'm not for a moment condoning it or anything, but what I'm saying is that there are. I don't like words like truths and all that. Anyway.
Yes. Would you like to add to anything? No. Any other question?
Just a minute.
Yes, just a minute. Wait for the mic.
Sure.
And if you can also utter your name, not for us to hear, but for us to record.
Thank you. I'm Rajiv Kumar Shukla. It's a very short question. We repeatedly heard you talking about you're moving away from a formal text, and you really don't want to be confined to a text. Is it the same experience? Is it because essentially it's a man's text? Do you find a resonance in your other director friends in this particular context?
You're asking me?
Yes.
No, I don't think I thought of it like that because they were men's texts. But largely, of course, all texts were written by men, what were available. So that could be a reason. But I think it became a much more immediate thing for me. Theatre as an activity became something which required me to explore what I want to explore. Now, it's not necessary that somebody else is feeling the same need at the same time. So, therefore, no texts are really available, written texts are available for that. And therefore, one tries to look at other materials so that there's a vast range of material from which you can probably choose what is closest to what you want to explore. So, as I said, that consciously it was not that this is a text written by men, therefore I don't want to do it. But it was just that later on, when I rethink, I do feel that, one of course is a question of point of view. My point of view as a woman maybe would be different from the way a man looks at the same relationship, situation, moment, experience. But also that when women are looking at the same thing, I found them to be more resonant with me and my experience and the way I wanted to say things. It was much closer, and therefore that excited me to want to negotiate with that, or want to go forward with that, or want to explore that further. So I think it was the structures that were emerging through women's writing, or the language that was emerging through women's writing, and the concerns and a different kind of sensibility which was emerging, which I think made it necessary to go away. And I think basically it was allowing a freedom which we didn't have in a ready dramatic text.
Neelam, you also went away from the text, so maybe you would like to add something.
I think initially when I started working with text, even though it was a pre-existing text, I never really kind of followed the way the text was structured. Even then I was tossing it around, reworking it, removing scenes, adding scenes.
The eternal complaint of playwrights.
No, well, fortunately the ones I chose were not around to register their complaints.
They're good to do that once.
So I think that also a text really becomes real for me in terms of how you construct it performatively. I don't think there is one approach to how you look at a text. Just like there are multiple interpretations, there are also multiple ways of doing it. And that is why no two directors will approach, or 10 directors will approach the same text in the same kind of manner. So I think the word director really comes from how you direct, how you position, how you interpret, how you see it. And within that, transformation, change happens.
One last question. Yes, Geeta?
This is NEELAM, and we heard at great length from Maya the use of the body. I think that you are deeply invested in the question.
Hold it close.
You are deeply invested in the question of the body, except that you are not the performer. You are inducing and bringing it forth. You are making it immanent in the mise-en-scène through your performers, or the performers that you collaborate with. And I'd like you to elaborate your ways of making this what I call immanent within the mise-en-scène through an ensemble rather than a singular body, as in the case of Maya. And I want you to particularly address it via your repeated recent repetition of Mantu in your in the way that you have presented his work, coalescing several texts and finding a configuration where you are able to make your statement, and it relates to the question of a male writer and a female director and the use of the body in that conjunction.
Well, I think, as we all know, Mantu never told polite stories. And sometimes when you read, I think he is an incredible storyteller, and I sometimes have to consciously say that I will not do him again, because there are so many different ways in which he can be presented, and the stories don't seem dated or do not seem to belong only to the days in which he wrote them. When I see a text of his like Tamasha, which is really about Jallianwala Bagh, I see Syria, I see so many, there's so much of a quality of lost homelands that are very integral to whether he talked about gender, whether he talked about within the domestic space, whether he talked, there is a very deep sense of something which is lost. It could be many things. I think they, to use an old-fashioned expression, the instrument of expression for a performer is the human body. It's a human body which is a container and creates the impulse and creates the text and creates the visual language and creates the narrative and creates how it cuts across space. So the body, I think, not being a performer myself, I'm on the outside, but I do know that the body cannot just be, it's like in the old tradition of text-based plays when you acted just from the neck upwards, which didn't engage with the entire, it didn't engage your entire body, your entire being. So I've always, and I think one of this whole thing about usage of the body really came with the fact that for many years I worked with female performers, female impersonators. And to me what was really, and these were female impersonators that did not come from a tradition of being the Ornagatha or being a Kathakali performer where the transformation of gender is a very mystical process. These were really folk performers who just slapped some powder on their face, stuffed their brow with whatever they could find available, whether it was a hanky or some cotton. But the moment they did that process, immediately, if I went to talk to them, they would cross their hands across their breast. So there was a kind of inner code that was functioning that created that transformation of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman performatively. And also because when I started working with them, they were really like street performers. They could be at a cross, at a road crossing and, turn into hermaphrodites and ask for money. So there was the whole quality of what it meant to use the body and be a performer. So I think that kind of interactive relationship between urban actors and female performers somewhere made me realize that how do you construct gender performatively for the stage? Is it something biological or is it really to do with something beyond body, So I think all these things, I have thought about it, but they're little nods, which kind of came into place, which became connections, which became for me that I want first the text to be expressed through the body without verbalizing the text, then how the same body which is embodying the text also creates a text visually. So there was a kind of, I won't call it a systematic methodology, but there was a sense of what I wanted, how I place the body in relationship to space, in relationship to objects, in relationship to text, in relationship to the dynamics between the rest of the performers and the individual performer. So I think all kinds of little things were happening.
Can I just add?
Just a minute.
Go ahead. Just to throw a cat among the pigeons, because Manto is being talked about. If we had more time, because there was a little slot where we were supposed to be discussing amongst ourselves as well, but we don't have the time. I was going to ask NEELAM the question whether she would do Manto yet again. We have two people. Have you done Manto as well? No. Okay, so I know she has, and I did a Manto way back. And would she do a Manto again is what I would ask NEELAM, because I, for one, know that I would not do a Manto ever again. And I'm just saying this to you as well. Sometime we need a forum, maybe a round table and everybody else, where we're talking across the arts, so that there are writers and performers, and we're talking about translating every which way. And why would two people in theatre have such differing attitudes to Manto? I'm not sure whether NEELAM would do it. But even considering that you just did it, let's say, when was the last Manto you did?
About 8 months ago.
Yeah, and so what it is that NEELAM finds in it and what it is that I militate against would be a good discussion.
Well, most of the 3 productions that I've done on Manto, except for one which was based on a single text, the last 3 have been with multiple texts.
Yeah.
So there is certainly a choice about, Monto is so
But they were all
so
Monto.
vast, yeah. Uh, I think the first one had 10 stories of Monto. But sometimes they were not like beginning, middle, and end of Monto. It was like sometimes in the last one, you take the stories, you fragment it, you kind of let it travel all over with interjections of images or silent scenes or so I don't know, I find him endless. I mean, I have to consciously say I won't do it again. But my desire would be to just do him over and over again. Because I find that every time I start reading him, I seem to discover dimensions which I had missed earlier.
Now, this last question. Then.
All three of you have...
Just a minute.
Sorry.
Wait for the mic.
I was trying to hurry up.
Because we are putting you on record. You cannot get away from that later.
So, all three of you have chosen the path of improvisation and the improvisational space, which equates it a little bit to the process of painting or sculpting or creating an image. And in both these processes, there is the building of something, the seeking of something, but it comes to a point where you say, this is it, not anymore. Or you don't know where that point is and you overdo the searching for something which you don't find. What in your experience is the factor that allows you to understand that this is it? The coalescing of the image.
Well, question has been asked. It need not be answered. No, but I mean, you can.
It's a nice question. Yeah. It requires another seminar.
Well, none of our speakers is fond of brevity, as you would have noticed already.
But I think it would be interesting if you could share some of
If I understand your question, it's about improvisation, it's about what emerges and what doesn't emerge, how moment and text, they coalesce and become something. No, I think, I'll tell you, like, for example, when I was doing Kitchen Katha many years ago, it was about food and it was about cooking and it was about sharing and it was loosely based on a text that had already been written. I have a little swing, a very tiny swing, not meant for swinging, but just a small little image of a swing on which I put a pumpkin. So my actors asked me why the pumpkin. I had no idea why I put the pumpkin. It just seemed right. And many years later, and I was always very neurotic about the pumpkin. It had to be this shape and it couldn't be the long one, it had to be the flat one. And then I started carrying it along with me, with my props, wherever we went. And then I remember many years later, we went to Chennai to do the same show. And from there we went to Pondicherry. Kirti, Anuradha and myself decided, let's go to Pondicherry. So we went to Pondicherry and I found outside each shop, there was a pumpkin. So I said, why do you have a pumpkin? And again, it was the entry to the kitchen which had the pumpkin. They said, it's supposed to be shubh, it's supposed to be good luck. Then someday I recognized that in the so-called archives of our memory, we store certain things and which do not seem to follow a rational, logical reason when we pull it out and put it in our creative space. But it just seems right. So that was a great moment for me because now I'm not looking for rationality, I'm not looking for explanations, justifications. I just feel it seems right to me. I'm not saying that what seems right to me has to be right, but I just trust that. Because I think theatre is about intuition. It's about the unfamiliar. It's about people being in a space, breathing, responding, much more than control. I don't know if that answers your question.
You were asking how far would one go or how long would one... I personally feel that when we are improvising, it is not necessarily to do with the exact situation that the text is dictating or that issue is dictating. It is around that. A lot of improvisational work happens on the ideas that that issue throws up. So that people are able to, the actors and the whole team, all of us, are able to explore several dimensions of, let's say, in the case of partition, the idea we were really exploring what does loss mean, what does displacement mean, what does memory mean. You know, sort of these were ideas which we explored at several levels so that we understand, you know, multi-level responses to that idea. And from that, the actual performance starts emerging. And then there is already a kind of textual base within which you then work. So for example, you know, there are certain things stay with you. One of the conditions that I've given the actors, and I quote that quite often, I still feel very moved by that. There was a condition that I gave them that, okay, you know, sort of you're going into your house for the last time, because they have said that, you know, sort of you have to vacate the village in 5 minutes. So, you know, what will you take with you? Most of the actors tried to be good people. So somebody was carrying an old ailing father, somebody was carrying something very valuable. So that's the kind of stereotype that that's what you'll do, you'll be a good person. There was one person who came into that space, did up, you know, sort of tidied the bed, just cleaned up some of the mess, looked at the room one last time and walked out. Now, that was something which was so unexpected. I mean, you know, sort of last time you were in that room, that you just want people to see something which is tidy. So what I'm saying is that these perspectives come and they enrich the experience with which you will then work on the text that is there. And the text, as you feel that it has been explored or that it is bringing out what that text is meant to bring out, then, you know, you proceed. There is also always, of course, a time constraint, otherwise we would go on endlessly. So I think it's more to do with around that text, where all these issues and all its dimensions, in different dimensions, you're able to look at.
Well, thank you very much with that pumpkin movement or with that well-made movement.
Maya wants to answer.
Oh, you want to, sorry. Be brief, please.
Yes, of course, I will try. I think, I was just trying to think about it. I think a lot of my shows in the last few years have been episodic. And I think what drives me is rhythm. And you beat, and there's a gap. And you beat, and there's a gap. And when you think of beat and the gap, of course, as you're improvising, you're creating a world, you fill it with detail. You fill it to such an extent that you are getting tantalized by this world that is getting created, and then you want to leave it before you make the last detail. So you want to be able to say, let it be. How do you not make that last moment so that you remain in a state of surprise, and hopefully the audience will be as well? What is that moment before the moment? Is, I think, sometimes, a lot of the time, for me.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Let me tell you what is in for you in the next few days. On 16th of August, we had the Gay Memorial Lecture in Gulmohar Hall of the India Habitat Center. And Shamim Hanfi talks about a great Urdu poet, Miraji. This is at 7 p.m. on 16th of July. From 19th to 23rd of July, we go to Mandla. Mandla is the place where Raza Sahib is buried, next to his father's grave. And we started doing something there because Mandla is not aware of who Raza was, because he left it at the age of 9 years. So we do 4 or 5 things. One, we are doing a clay workshop in 4 schools. We are distributing an exercise book with a Raza painting called Mandala, reproduced on the exercise book, to 4,000 students. We are doing a young artist camp for that region. We are putting 200 umbrellas on the banks of Narmada to come, for everybody to come and paint it and take it home. And then we have started a young art writers workshop called Ruparu, and Vivan and Geeta, etc. have already been there. So a second session will be held there, where these art writers will be coming and they will be mentored. Then on the Narmada, and Raza Sahab always says Narmada Ji, he will never say Narmada. So Narmada Ji ke kinare, we have Pandwani, we have Kabir Gayan, we have Bambulika and some other things. So it's a rich fair that we do. And then of course the next art fair, Art Matters, will be on 21st August here, when we discuss the only complete book of poetry done by Saumitra Mohan, a senior poet who stopped writing. He had only 120 and odd poems. So we are having a discussion and some reading by him. Thank you very much for being here. And may I present the ladies with flowers. And you still. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can leave for whatever destination you wish.